So today we're going to be talking about how to do personalized outreach the right way. Let's talk about the big problem in personalized outreach. So there's actually three of them. And problem number one is that personalization is not just repeating somebody's information back to them. Just because we have a bunch of great data tools out doesn't mean that it just becomes a free-for-all where you can just start pointing out stuff about them. Oh, you're wearing this, you work at this, this kind of stuff doesn't really translate very well because it ends up looking like this. I don't know if you're familiar with The Office, but if you've ever watched the episode where Kelly learns that it's sort of hypnotic to repeat somebody's name at them enough times, you can make them like you. And she goes around basically the office, just keep on, she's trying to get a raise, I think, for Michael. And she keeps going, Michael, Michael. And it's funny because it's crazy. And unfortunately, a lot of sales outreach that we get is kind of like this. So here I've written kind of a subject line where it says, hey, Dan, blank. Hi, Dan. I was looking at your site. Oh, Dan, I really love what you've done. Dan, I was wondering if this, Dan. And anytime we get away from natural sounding language, it starts to sound strange and it starts to become depersonalized. And then it's not just small talk either. So for example, this is the question that I want you to keep in mind as we go through the bullets. So what? Hey, nice shirt. Hey, we're both Steelers fans. Hey, crazy about the war that's happening. I've actually seen that, which is crazy. I visited your city, wherever you're at. That's great. I think it's okay when we're starting things off in a conversation in person, maybe. But if we're trying to start a sales conversation, all that information is okay. You can find information about me online if you want. So what? Is that going to bring you closer to a healthy sales conversation? That's really the question. Okay. And then finally, personalization is not false flattery, which is the most common third problem that we see. So you don't have to read this whole thing, but essentially what this type of an email is hey, we'd love to feature you because you're so wonderful. We're so impressed by the work that you've done. We think you're so prestigious and we'd like to put you on our prestigious list of prestigious people. And frankly, again, it's a little bit strange. We're going to come back to this specific email in a second. So here's what the opportunity here is around personalization. Everybody else who has access to the tools that we have essentially has become very lazy. And it's okay, I guess, to use certain tools in a certain way, and I'll show you why in a second. But lazy repetition, small talk, again, that is really just irrelevant. And then finally, things that get upsetting. So let me just show you one example here, because consider what an inbox looks like. This is one tactic that I'm highlighting here that is not a good tactic, where somebody is pointing out the fact that I went to a university called University College London, UCL. They pulled it from my profile, and they're basically creating a hook or a subject line with the word UCL in it, and saying something like, if you notice, these are all separate people from different companies at different times, but it's the same sort of hacky tactic. So they all say something like, I noticed you studied at UCL. Interested to see how it was there. Saw you attended UCL. Always interesting to hear how people's college experiences impacted their future. I mean, what BS, right? I saw you went to UCL. It's always it's this kind of stuff over and over. And this is just one tactic. My point here is that our inboxes are filled with these things. So if you consider the person you're sending an email to, if you're taking some sort of copy paste hacky thing out there that somebody else has told you to do, frankly, probably there's a dozen other teams that have done the same thing to that person. And what you think is personalized or what might look kind of clever in one email becomes very, very sort of like a big red flag and really annoys people. So I think that this kind of thing, you want to be very careful. Are you doing something that you think is just hot right now? Or are you doing something because there's a deeper reason to make a real connection with somebody? So food for thought there as we go on to sort of go through our framework here, okay? So let's define exactly what we mean by personalization and then how we can use it the right way. There are three core principles that I'd love you to walk away from this presentation with. So essentially, personalization is about specificity. That's the first big word I want you to remember, specificity. Are we asking one question or are we hammering them with a bunch of different features or a bunch of different questions? So in this example here, just to cut to the chase a little bit, this email was sent to me where the person, at this company, they have some good stuff. They have a good offer. They have good results, but they're hammering me with, hey, we can help you with a whole bunch of influencers. We're on YouTube, we're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're on a whole bunch of different places, and we can help you with all these different channels with potentially a complicated process. You want to talk? And it's a little bit overwhelming to understand what's going on. So instead of this type of thing, what's better is to just say, hey, instead of YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, et cetera, why not just focus on YouTube? So for example, I just rewrote this email and I took all his stuff and I basically transferred it into a more focused message that said, hey, I checked out your YouTube channel and I grabbed this chart from a website called Social Blade. It took less than 30 seconds to do. Added a little arrow to it. And I said, hey, I noticed that your YouTube channel's dipping. So no shade, but we can probably help. Is that something you'd be interested in? And that sort of thing, and here I've written this year, we've helped 50 channels 2x within three months of working together. That type of thing is it's a good way to just get the message across, right? So instead of saying all the stuff about, we do all these different things, we could, help you do these 5 different types of transformations and we could, do all this work together and it'd be amazing. It might be, but the person just doesn't understand what you're talking about. Whereas I can walk away from this email in about 10 seconds and go, oh, they can help solve my big problem on YouTube, for example. So yes, I think you should think it less is more. And what is the one question, if you could only ask one question that would move the needle the most with the prospect? And then the second word here, word number 1 is specificity. Word number 2 is relevancy. So here's a message I got that I actually got this today. It's funny that I just don't like because I am a CMO, I'm in marketing, and I do not handle payroll. So why is this person, although they're sending me a short message, this is not in my wheelhouse. So why am I getting this? So, hey, Dan, I understand you've got tons of things on your plate. Seems like your company might be wasting resources on payroll. I don't think so. But anyway, have you checked into changing providers? Thank you. Look forward to our chat. This is not relevant to me. You've just given me homework to sort of understand, I don't know, are we? Is that a question that I should ask? It's put a whole bunch of stuff in my head that I don't really care about right now. What's going on? So instead, this kind of message would probably be a lot better where it's still the same ask essentially or related, where the person can say, hey, Dan, I'm looking to reach your CFO, Bob. We help sales consultancies like yours save about 70% on the payroll tool spend. I've tried him on email and LinkedIn, and I really think your team would see immediate value. Mind connecting me? So I don't always love the sort of sideways route there, but I think that's a much better email to send where you're recognizing that I'm not the right person, but maybe you could introduce, me to this person, that kind of thing. So relevancy is highly important and it's very easy. It took about, again, 30 seconds to just adjust it slightly to the persona. And it makes me feel a little bit more like, hey, you're making my life easier by giving me something easy to understand and then easy to do or not do. But at least this is not stressful. I can say no and just, I wouldn't have any emotion attached to it. Whereas the first one, this kind of feels like, come on, man, this is pretty lazy. So let's go on here. So the third principle here, if principle number 1 is specificity, principle number 2 is relevancy, principle number 3 is clarity. So you remember the first email that we looked at, that very long email that I have there in the background? Here's a rewritten version of that. And what that person is selling is essentially a place in a top 10 list in their magazine. And while I personally don't love the offer in general, they do have some very cool stuff that I actually am interested in, but it's buried so deeply within all of this text. It has a bunch of flattery in it, sure, but it also has just a lot of information that is just probably, it just adds more density to what I'm trying to communicate. And instead, if I could just rewrite this, these are her numbers. If I were to say, hi, Dan, would you like to reach 129,250 C-level sales leaders? Yeah, I would, actually. I think you'd be a perfect fit for our audience, and we can get your profile and backlinks set up in 20 minutes. Give me something easy. Put some time around it. Here's an example, and then if they have a screenshot of somebody's fake profile, that's a place to put it in. But this would come across very well because you're saying, what is the thing that I'm actually offering you? What is the benefit? What's the one thing? So specificity, relevancy, and clarity. And then here are the 5 levels of personalization. And I want to point out that as I go through these 5, this is really the framework that I want to walk through with you today. Any of these can work and any of these can fail. I personally think that as you go up the list from level 1 to level 5, you get more and more powerful and you have less and less likelihood to sort of fall apart. So if you're giving this to your sales team, if you're a leader, if you're writing this yourself, whether you're founder-led sales or you're a sales rep, these can all work, but they're not a magic bullet. I want you to really, really think about what the qualities you're putting into these things. So I'm trying to give you a couple examples here that are both good, bad, and somewhere in between that we can actually sort of use in our own messaging, as long as we understand what is the main purpose we're trying to push here. So Level one is company triggers. We're going to go through examples of each of these. Level two is personal triggers. Level three is common ground. Level four is straight to the specific, clear, and relevant point. And then level five is join their conversations if you can. So these are the 5 levels. And I think that this is a good way to think about the type of messaging that you're sending out. So as I go through this, have a think about your own messages and sort of where you would fall in your cold outreach. What sort of emails are you putting together? What sort of messages are you putting together? Where do you fall in this? So let's go through some examples here. So company triggers. This might be something like, I noticed that you're hiring for, an engineer. And is that because you're trying to accomplish something? Congrats on your Series B. I saw your brand account posted about whatever topic. And if we pause here for a second, you will probably recognize if you're in startups in general, as soon as you raise money, you probably get bombarded with people. And this is because it's an easy trigger for people to find about your company and then hammer you with messages. That doesn't mean it's a bad message, but the way to really make these better and better is to attach a so what. That's kind of the consistent thing. There's give me more context, give me more something extra. It's almost like a 1-2 punch where you're only giving me one and you're not following up with 2. So I noticed you're hiring for this kind of role. If you just stop there, it's kind of a weird message. I'm just noticing things about you. Whereas if you said, I notice you're hiring for whatever role, and this means blank to me, we'll come to that in a second in level 3. Congrats on your Series B, and that means blank. I saw your brand account posted about whatever, and that means blank. These become better messages. But company triggers are very easy to find. They're very easy to research, and they're almost kind of built in for you in LinkedIn Sales Navigator and a couple other tools. So these are the easiest ones to find if you really struggle to find any sort of hook points with your prospects. Level 2 is personal triggers. So personal is always going to be a little bit more personalized than company. So I want you to think about the specific person and the specific role that you're trying to message. So for example, this could look like congrats on the new job. We see notifications when there's a new hire at somewhere. Maybe there's a new CEO at the company that you've been trying to reach. Maybe that's a reason for you to reach out again, right? Congrats on the new job. Wondering if I can help you make your first 90 days a success, for example. I saw that before X, you were Y. I'll give you another example here. For one company that we worked with, which was in the security space, a lot of people who were head of security or that kind of role had a background either in the military or in the police force. And one of the sales reps had a background as a police officer. And it was a very easy conversation for him to sort of create. And again, we'll come to this in level 3 in a second because you'll see how the pieces come together. But before X, you were Y. Well, before this, I was also in the military. Before X, I was also, as long as this stuff is genuine. You can probably start to find common ground, which is getting ahead of myself here a little bit. But it's very easy to find these personal triggers, basically. I noticed you went to Harvard, right? If you just use the personal triggers by themselves, it's not the strongest version of things, but it's very easy to find out information by going to somebody's LinkedIn profile as long as they have a half filled out profile. That doesn't mean that it's always there. And I would be looking for personal triggers above company triggers in general. And I only want you to bring yourself into the mix if it's really genuine. And I want you to be careful to avoid small talk because basically the easier small talk when we're in person, we have so many cheat codes that we can use, visual cues, facial features, various things that, our voice that we can use to sort of mask the conversation and keep things moving forward. But when it comes to actually speaking to people from a perspective of, a sales email, which is pretty devoid of extra cues, you've got to be very close to the conversation that you want to start. So if I'm talking about the weather in person, maybe that's fine. Maybe I can quickly kind of jump to stuff and get to the sales conversation with a prospect. But over email, if I start talking about the weather, what do you care, right? So it's basically, if we look at things like this, I noticed you went to Harvard. If you add that qualifier and you did too, maybe that's something really powerful. If it's just, I noticed you went to Harvard, it's kind of weak, right? So here's the cybersecurity example. Before cybersecurity role, you were in the Army. Me too. I was in blank. Anytime you find tribes, anytime you find brotherhoods, or anytime you find little teams, little fandoms, you can create potentially a good starting point, but it's got to be close to the business conversation, to the sales conversation that you want to start. If it's not close, frankly, you should move on and do level 4, which we're going to get to in a second. So, and this is also another one that is actually level 5. Notice your post on blank. I actually just finished working on something similar. This kind of common ground is good because I find that usually when it's a work common ground, it's very easy to transition to the kind of sales conversation, to the kind of problem solution, the value conversations that we want to have. Okay. So level 4 is straight to the point. This looks like your problem, my solution. This looks like why me, why now, right? That why now is very important. If you're able to put the timing element to things, this is a very powerful framework that you can use to really get to the point. Some basic rules of straight to the point writing, especially with cold emails, is to keep things as short as possible. So I would think of things really as less than 100 words, less than 50 if possible. I would keep things focused on one point, and I would really use language that is jargonless, that is very simple to understand. And imagine that you were really explaining what you do to your grandma or to a child or to somebody who's completely out of your industry. If you can make the message that simple to that kind of person, the person reading it, even though they're an expert in their industry, will probably also appreciate your simplicity and your directness. And then lastly here, if you struggle with that in general, if you're in a dense industry, or if you come from a background of maybe a certain type of writing where you've been trained to sort of sound like Shakespeare, we can get away from that by just speaking out loud. This is a little bit of a cheat code that I feel like most professional writers do that many people don't understand, whether they're authors of books, whether they are copywriters, whether they're whatever. The amount of time that people walk around dictating to their phone is huge. And it's because our ideas tend to be forced into a more compressed version of communication. You're forced to sort of hear yourself back on a feedback loop as I say it out loud versus as I think it. And if you can do that and practice out loud, I think that is a very powerful way to get better at your writing in general. We're going to move on here in a second, but I do want to stop on the idea of jargon-free writing. So the reason, this is a bit nuanced, but stick with me here. The idea that jargon is always bad is maybe a little bit of an overstatement. You want to speak the language of your industry. So for example, I used to work in the UN, and the UN is known as an industry, as an organization that has just a lot of acronyms in it. So if you're speaking to the right acronyms, you're speaking to the language of the person at the other end of the computer. But if you start saying things like, I hate to use, this is the overused version of jargon, but the word synergy, or utilize instead of use, you want to simplify your writing, because even just these little tiny 1% rises in the complexity of the language that you're choosing to use, it adds up very quickly, and it hurts the overall communication that you're trying to do. The point of copy is to install information from my brain into yours as quickly and efficiently as possible. Anything I do to get in the way, including using big words, including using jargon that might be great for me internally at my company, but not at your company, it's even just little bits add up in a very dramatic way. And I would encourage you just to stay safe, to avoid jargon completely, and not try to get clever about industry language. Okay? We recently talked about job stories, and it's up on the YouTube channel. You can find our video on job stories and how to use ChatGPT to generate a lot of different, very focused contexts in which to send emails. But basically, this is the difference that you can have when writing from a job story instead of a value prop. I think that what happens with many people is that they try to hit level 4. They try to go for level 4 by going straight to the point. But the problem is they start from a value prop side of things instead of a job story. And when you start from a value prop side of things, this is just for example's sake, a renewable energy analytics company, okay? A value prop internally for them might look like, hey, I help renewable energy companies accomplish sustainable energy production with energy efficiency analytics and optimization tools. Internally, great. It's our mission. It's a very clear way to state what we do. Wonderful. If people visit our website, that's even good stuff for the website, for the headlines and whatnot. But when you're writing to a person in a specific context, suddenly the value prop statement is very broad. And it sort of says, hey, I help you with everything, even though it looks specific here. Whereas if you use a job story, job stories you'll have a whole bunch of different job stories. A job story can give you a much more focused place to start from. So for example, this is just one of many job stories that we generated. The value prop is in the voice of the company, of your company, and then the job story is in the voice of your customer. Very different story. So in this case, this is an ultra specific scenario. When I'm facing fluctuating energy outputs from my solar farm because of changing weather, I want to analyze and predict energy production levels accurately so that I can optimize energy and distribution and reduce waste. Suddenly, mind-blowingly different how I would go about writing this message. Suddenly, if I had a sales team writing, writing these messages in general, or even just trying to communicate in general, we know that we can produce much more focused, much more crisp, and much more impactful messages by starting with that more focused context. So we did a larger thing on job stories, and that was really for strategy. But I do think it's worth calling out here is that when you have this in front of you and you're going for level 4, which is really the right level for most companies to shoot for, you should have a focused starting point so you understand exactly what this list is, exactly who this persona is, exactly what their problem is, not just in general, but right now, so that I can help solve it. Okay? And then level 5, this is when possible. This is not always easy to do, but if your prospect is somebody who's very active on social media, if your prospect is somebody who has a public persona in the sense that they're on podcasts all the time, they're being quoted in magazines, they're out there doing their thing quite a bit, then probably we have a chance to dig into stuff that they're already talking about. And by joining their conversations, this is just a quick example from a guy called Mark Richard, who sent me probably my favorite cold email of the entire year, I think for last year, which was this. Hello, Dan. I saw that you liked Will's recent LinkedIn post, and then he links to it. Totally agree that we need to build relevance to personalize correctly. I've booked 216 meetings in 4 months by leveraging LinkedIn post likers to build pipeline like I'm currently doing. The follow. Any interest? So if you'll notice, he's following a lot of the right rules in terms of format, in terms of structure, in terms of length, to create a very punchy message directly to me. But he's also choosing to basically break the ice, which has already been broken by me, right? He's going into my conversations. He's going into stuff that I've commented on this guy, Will's post, and then he's coming in with his own opinion on it. This is a great framework. Now, unfortunately, I have to say that this has now been copied by people with comment bots, and unfortunately have kind of sort of started to hurt this type of a response in general in the comments. I still think doing an email is absolutely fine like this. But you'll see a lot of comments on LinkedIn, for example, have been taken over by AI tools that will do something like this, where it'll say, ha, fantastic insight. I also believe that blah, blah, blah. And once you see it, you'll see it everywhere. But that aside, I still think that the general idea of imagine you're at a dinner party, right? Instead of walking up to your prospect immediately and sort of going like, I sell you this, right? We can instead say, oh, are you guys talking about the latest blank in these 2 products? I was just looking at that. I think it's product B is actually better. What do you think? Suddenly you're in the middle of the conversation very quickly. And to be very clear, it's a sales conversation very quickly, especially if you're commenting on comments in LinkedIn. You're not talking about random stuff. Usually LinkedIn content is going to be very, very related to the sales that you want to make and the problems that people have that you want to solve. So that's there. And in general, this can probably bleed over into social selling concepts, into just, using LinkedIn the way that LinkedIn wants you to use it, if that makes sense. So I think that there is value there, but I also want to caution, especially newer reps, that spending suddenly a whole bunch of time on LinkedIn just randomly commenting on people's stuff that's not a strategy. That's not something you should do. But we can maybe talk about the social selling more in the future in another one of these. But for the time being, I do want you to consider this framework. Again, greeting, it's a link to their comment somewhere. You can also use a screenshot. Your own opinion, that part is very important. Put in a genuine opinion of yours. Maybe it could be a question, and then some proof, and then a soft CTA like any interest, worth a chat, etc. Any one of these can be good. If you come to the table understanding where your strengths lie as a company, what do you guys sell? And maybe there's a certain place where that just fits in naturally the best. Maybe there's a place that you specifically find that you have this great, background that you share, like I mentioned with the military, the police officer stuff. Maybe you have something like that, and maybe that's a strength you can lean into. Maybe you studied at the one university that everybody else in this industry has studied at. Sometimes that happens. Maybe you're at ground zero in terms of like the place that everybody kind of, your industry is focused in one city, and you're there too. There's all kinds of interesting and creative stuff you could do with this. So I want to emphasize that I do think that level 5 is much better than level 1. But any of these could work, and any of these can also be fill in the blanks with some, real BS that doesn't go anywhere. So I would invite you to really think about these at a deeper level and sort of say, which one fits what I sell and which one fits me? So why does this stuff work? So it gives you options to start from. I think that it's very important to consider writing from a blank page is usually a tough experience for most people. It takes a lot of time to sort of to just get it written. It drains you of creativity really when you have to start from scratch every single time. So I think that I mentioned that dictating was a big professional writer's hack, like in a good way. It's a secret that a lot of people use. Writing from not scratch, whether that's templates or frameworks, I prefer the word framework, some notes, something where you're familiar, where you know you're leaning into your strengths, massively makes it easier for you to write more effectively and easier. And as I said, certain levels will work better for certain audiences and certain sales reps and certain founders and whoever you are. I think this is a key point, is that you want to stay flexible here. You want to stay open. And you really want to think about the deeper stuff. What's the deeper personalization here? Not the hacks. When by personalization, if we really mean specificity, relevancy, and clarity, at the deepest level, how can I actually connect with this person who I don't know, who I don't see? Technically, we're strangers. Technically, we probably will never meet each other. But how can I empathize the most? And I don't mean this to sound fluffy. I really, really think that everybody here should consider this. What are the problems that they're, facing in general, that your prospect is facing in general? It's probably a list of problems, right? Well, are you attacking the most relevant problem on the list, or something that's kind of mid-tier? Because if it's mid-tier, you might want to rejig your entire messaging strategy and say, well, maybe I should actually spend some time thinking about this and go for the actual thing that is the level of problem that's keeping them up at night, the level of problem that really makes them sweat and gets them sort of filled with anxiety. Because if you can help them with that problem, your sales conversations become easier, your writing becomes easier, and frankly, the relationships that you start through these conversations become just much better. And then, as I said before, stay flexible, stay thoughtful, and really try to stay on top of what you mean to do here. Again, not to sound fluffy, but you really are helping people solve their problems with your products. And unfortunately, we often get in our own ways by coming up with all these clever tricks and hacks and tools and whatever. And sometimes it's just about empathizing with the person that you're trying to reach, and use these couple of levels. Add your own if you want to, but use my levels to try to connect with them better in a more genuine way that fits them and you. Both sides are equally important. And then before I move on to the Q&A here, I do want to talk about the importance of a structured pitch. This is something we talk about a lot. And we basically want to look at, we have a couple of tools that we use on our own with clients when it comes to structuring your pitch. A structured pitch is very important because it is kind of like starting emails from a couple of structured frameworks. It gives you a starting point to jump off to that you kind of know will create a better experience for the customer. It also allows you to optimize and practice on an individual basis. And it also helps you basically optimize practice and align your team collectively and get everybody on the same page. This is the kind of stuff that really is the trick, I think, to long-term improving your sales. Once you start a baseline, you can then really create demos that connect with people and you sort of know will just easily move people to the next stage happily and excitedly. All right, so BB asks, what are your thoughts on number of lines in an email and number of words in a subject line? On subject lines, what is the best subject line for open rate? I've seen quick question work well. So, okay, there's a couple questions there. Let me separate them out. First, let's talk about which is the best subject line for open rates. That question is, unfortunately, I'm going to give you a non-answer. It really highly depends on your audience. In general, rules for subject lines is that they should be as short as possible and as boring and direct and clear about what's in the email. You should not try trickery, and you should not use names in subject lines. So a subject line might be like, if you were maybe getting an email about attending this live class, the subject line might be like, live class, personalized outreach, coming to the live class, something like that. Just very, very straight to the point. Don't overcomplicate it. Keep it very simple. Then the other part of your question was, what are your thoughts on lines in an email, number of words in a subject line? So as I said, number of words in a subject line, less than 5, I would say. And then this is a loose rule. You can break it if you want to, but be very, very boring and clear and direct. And as short as possible. If you struggle with that, by the way, ChatGPT might be able to help, but keep the words simple. Don't use jargon. Don't use complicated language. And then you didn't ask, you sort of asked this in number of lines in an email. I would just keep the email as short as possible. So imagine you're writing to a friend, and really think about this, because I write to my friends in a very different voice maybe than I would write to my parents, or that I would write to, I don't know, somewhere how I used to write when I first started my career. When I used to write to people professionally, I looked like I was coming out of a library from the 1800s. It was horrible. But I would keep it punchy. I would keep it short sentences, keep yourself limited to under a certain number of word count. So I like to say under 50 for the people who really can be very clear and direct. Definitely keep it under 100. Okay. Sumana says, Dan, why is jargon-free writing appreciated by people working in those industries? Simply put, for clarity, for simplicity. That's really the main point here. And then let's see, Shakuri says, any thoughts on how we do this at scale? So Shakuri, you're asking an interesting question. This is definitely something that comes up all the time. And basically, we have a scale. We have, or spectrum, I should say. On one side, we have completely automated, just one click and the same message goes out to thousands of people. And on the other hand, you're writing every email completely manually, completely from scratch. Somewhere in the middle is probably where all of us want to fall. If you have a huge target market, you're probably going to go a little bit more on the automated side. And if you have a very limited market where there's very few people to contact, you probably want to, basically fall on the side of the more manual stuff. That's kind of the way that I would look at it. But when you're writing these, frankly, if you get used to using these frameworks as starting points, you can write quote unquote manual emails from these frameworks actually quite quickly. I don't think for an SDR who has 100 activities a day that you can really write everything from scratch, but I think you can come pretty close. So I don't want you to basically push away the idea of writing a little bit manually just because it involves a little bit of manual work, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's go through. E says, I'm prospecting lawyers. For some reason, these people have nothing on their socials. Absolutely, that's very true. How would I personalize emails for them? So here's where you have to get a little bit creative. For certain, especially older school industries or kind of more tight-lipped people, cybersecurity is another one of these. Their LinkedIns are kind of dead. And you have to come up with a couple of more interesting things. So sometimes that means keeping track of the news very, very closely. And like you can set up a Feedly account. That's Feedly. Feedly is a place where it's a news aggregator that you can just stay on top of the industry with, put in a couple of triggers, and by staying very close to the industry news, you can probably start some very relevant conversations with lawyers, combining and cross-sectioning news like industry news and local stuff. So maybe there's local regulations in the state that you're targeting, plus international news, plus maybe some developments from local lawyers. That's one idea, but this is the fun part about sales to me, where you have to kind of think outside the box a little bit and look for stuff that really would uncover. Maybe you have to look for referrals from other lawyers. Maybe that's a big part of your strategy. Is becomes looking for a referral based program, or where you can get warm intros, kind of like the email that I showed you in there, where you kind of go sideways into a conversation. But this is the fun part about sales, and I really think that you should kind of embrace that and don't just look at it as like, oh, they're not on socials, I don't have anything. That's not true. Imagine you were working, 30 years ago when we didn't even have the internet properly. What would you do? That's the fun stuff. What are the email KPIs to look at to determine if outreach is viable for our SaaS company? Good question. So I think that if you are looking at basically contactable, serviceable, addressable market, the CSAM, you probably want to have, at least a few hundred companies in there. And I think that I would actually be surprised if somebody could name me a market that is not viable for email outreach. I don't think I can think of one off the top of my head. I think everybody is, but there are probably some qualifiers that you could put in. You and Kyle suggest now going for cold calls these days. We experience low connection rates on the phone, but 80% open rates on emails. Wow. How to fix that? Auto dialing or AI calling infrastructure. So Artur, for most companies, we use a mix of both. I think that cold calls are the fastest and really the best way to get the needle moving for your sales. You also get that feedback loop with your sales team where you can't get this on email really, because your sales rep will actually hear things back from the person. Oh, I upset them, or, oh, they really lit up at this part of the conversation. I can't get that over email. So it's always a mix of both. Very rare occasions is it only cold calling or only emailing. But if you're getting 80% open rates on emails, I'd ask you, what's your click-through or what's your reply rate? I think that's a very, very interesting question. And basically, I would look at, interspersing call, email, call, email, call, email as the simplest way to look at this. And often calls could be used as an icebreaker in email. Hey, I tried to reach you. I left you a voicemail. Thought I'd email you too. It's an easy icebreaker. It's a little bit cheap, but it works. So I think mixing the two are good. And auto dialing is fine. There are some auto dialers that are good. AI calling is coming up. I know that Convolo is doing some really interesting work in that space. I don't know the results of it yet, so I can't really speak to that. But there are some good auto dialers. If you'd like more information, definitely email Kyle. Okay. And then Gabe, you're also curious about how to do this at scale. Also curious if you have any experience with tools, that use AI large language models to write emails based on buyer personas. Is this effective? Is it worth paying attention to? Okay, so as a writer, I will say that right now, ChatGPT and most of the LLMs out there are not good enough to write the final copy for you. However, they are very, very, very good at thinking strategy. Hey, what's a good angle we could take? Hey, I'm thinking about using these as my selling points. What am I missing? If you ask AI these questions, you can come up with incredibly deep answers, great conversations. The AI tool is more of a thing that you should be speaking to while thinking. Does that make sense? You can ask it to create a bunch of hooks. I have a tool for that. If you'd like it, just email me. I use it for the job stories to create a whole bunch of job stories at once. But I think that these tools are not ready to write the copy for you yet. However, should you keep an eye on it? Sure, keep an eye on it. Who knows? Probably there's going to be a good tool that finally cracks the code sometime next year, I would imagine. But for now, I would not rely on it for final copy. Dylan Temples, personalization is great, but it takes time and thought. How do you decide who to personalize for and who to give a less tailored prospecting effort? Well, easy answer there, Dylan, is how important is the person for you? And I think it's, yes, we want to say every prospect's important, of course, but maybe you're trying to reach, you have a couple of whale clients that you really, if you could land these people, it would mean night and day for the company. It would be an incredible difference for you. Well, in that case, I would take my sweet time to really put in that effort to spend that mental capital on trying to create good messaging for that person. If it's somebody who you're maybe a little bit looser, it's a bigger market, and you're just trying to kind of optimize your messaging, that's okay to get a little bit looser and kind of try some wacky ideas. And but if it's that's the way that I would look at it, is where would my prospects rank if I were to list all of them by persona, and then spend your sweet time with those ones at the very top. Jerry, in my industry, I use super boring job-related subject lines and short. Absolutely, that's the way every industry should be. Here's one thing just to comment on subject lines for a second. You can get opens. If you really want to boost your open rate, I could get you opens, tomorrow. But just because you have an open rate doesn't mean you have a good sales conversation happening. I know somebody who was selling a very scammy, cold emailing service course thing that was really horrible. And the way that he was advertising on Twitter was like, oh, I get these crazy 90% open rates. And when you look at the subject lines, they were stuff like F you. And can you imagine? Like people sending this professionally. And would people open the message? Yes, they'd open the message. But then they'd be horrified at this. Like, hold on, what? They'd be shocked. You're manipulating somebody into giving you a big open rate, and then nobody wants to talk to you. So is that valuable? Nah, not really. So, well, not at all, I should say. Very directly, you should not do that. Yeah, Atur, Lavender for cold emails. I totally support Lavender. Lavender.ai. They're a great company, great tool. They have a free version of their tool, and it's a great little, basically, AI writing assistant that'll score you as you're writing. It'll time you. It'll do all kinds of stuff. And if you use it, frankly, you'll speed up your writing quite a bit, and you'll learn to write better. So I think the outcome of that is you might be able to do a lot more manually than you realize from now. So it looks like most questions have been answered here. And on that note, take care of yourselves. We will speak soon. See you later, everybody.